if you would bow your heads and your hearts. And Father, we do thank you once again, Lord, for allowing us to come together. And as we open your word, we just ask for you to anoint our ears and our hearts to hear what you have to say to us, Lord, that the application would truly be where it needs to be for each of us as individuals. But, Lord, as we just open your word, we just pray that it becomes part of us and draws us closer to you. And that's what we ask today, Father. In Jesus' name, amen. I think everybody in here has probably been on a road trip, and there's normally, in my experience, there's two types of people on a road trip. And if you're fortunate to be married to an opposite, which I am, because we are usually miles apart on most everything other than the fact that I'm good looking. We agree on that. But she doesn't agree on that a lot of times. But at the point I'm trying to make is it's been my experience there are two polar opposites when it comes to road trips. Those people that just want to get there. They don't care what's on the way, shortest route from A to B, get on the interstate, go, and just get there. That would be my wife. Me, I don't usually want to I can get there quickly, but I don't necessarily want to go the quickest route. I like the meandering through the backwoods, stopping the little towns, with the traffic lights or one stop sign or what have you, seeing the little houses, just going. It's kind of like that movie, cartoon movie years ago, I think it was called Cars. And the point of it was that the town had been bypassed by the interstate and then it's kind of dried up. And that literally does happen. But there's a line in there, where they talk about how the interstate just cuts through the terrain to get where it's going. And it was, of course, designed in the 50s to get the military all over the place. That's what the interstate was originally designed to do. But the old state highways, for here, I guess, not being from around here, Highway 5, Canton Road, those kind of they worked with the terrain. They go down through the valleys and around, and they meander, and they make sure they hit all the little towns as they go. And so I'm one of those people that would rather enjoy the journey, and I'm looking, and yes, every once in a while I get off the side of the road. I get in trouble for that. And I'm like, look over there. She can't look because she gets motion sickness real easily, which is usually the reason she just wants to get on the interstate and go. But I enjoy the circuitous route, all right, the meandering, and I don't care if it takes me 30 more minutes or even an hour most of the time. I just want to see the country and enjoy the ride. I got an audio book playing or a podcast or music. I'm there for the ride. I will extend the ride. I don't take the most direct way back and forth to work. I won't even take the same way a lot of times because I get tired of seeing stuff. If I'm jamming to some tune or something's going on in what I'm listening to, I will go past the street I live on, go down, hit a cul-de-sac, and come around and hit it again. Because once I get to the house and get to the driveway, and then I got to get out of the car, I've got to shut all that off, and I got an old car, so I have to unhook everything. I don't get Bluetooth in my car. And then once I get in the house, that's over with. I don't get to listen to music anymore. I have to turn the audio book off. I have to turn off the podcast and do whatever it is I'm told to do. So, or I can leave them in and I don't hear you. Or at least act like it's playing and I don't hear you. But the point is, there's some people that enjoy the journey and don't mind the turns and all that. And there are others that are just get there right away. I don't think any of us can predict our futures, but I do believe, especially when we were younger and you're in high school and you know everything, and you think you've got it mapped out. And there was a girl that graduated with me, and she dated a boy that graduated with me. And somehow in English class, I guess it was our senior year, somehow I got hold of her paper. I don't know if I just saw it and read it or what. And I don't remember what the topic, I don't remember what I wrote about, but I remember what she wrote about, which was this story. She was going to marry this guy, I'm not going to say his name, just marry this guy and have, 3 kids or whatever it was in the White House and the picket fence, and he's going to, make a lot of money, and it's just going to be the storybook romance. And honestly, they got married, they had 2 or 3 kids, and as far as I can see on Facebook, they're doing well. But most of us don't that doesn't happen. What I mean is the way we thought it would happen. Okay? So most of us, we can't plan those things out. And I think about the Apostle Paul when it got there. When, he was an educated man. His parents had him in all the schools they could get him into at the time. And then you read his story, and he never would have, of course he couldn't have predicted that he would have been the guy that went out, for the most part, was the guy that evangelized the Gentiles. Because there was no evangelization, really. There was no church. I'll just put it that way. He was a Pharisee of the Pharisees. He was a scribe. He was an academic. He never would have predicted what Jesus did when he visited Paul on the road to, Damascus. I was fixing something Raw Reese said, popped into my head. He's bad about mispronouncing things. So I lost track of the city. But on the Damascus road, he never would have predicted that or where his life went after that. And so today we're kind of talking about just that thing, a route that's not the one we would normally pick. When and why God takes us on a different path. Last week we talked about nation building and a new culture and how God had to establish that sort of thing when Israel eventually gets to the promised land, he starts with a new nation, a new culture, a new worldview. He starts from scratch. That is his toehold to take back the planet and bring it all, of course, to the worship of God, Yahweh. But we're also going to see something here that if you pay attention to what Pharaoh does, as we read today, that looking at things from the outside can be of help at times. I always keep one board member outside the church just to be somebody looking in, because you can become myopic when you're in the middle of everything. But a lot of times looking at things from the outside can lead us to false impressions as to what's really happening. And if we're not walking with God, if we're not speaking to God, then we can actually misinterpret what's happening. And if we don't trust, in the end, whatever your theology is here and there, what you must understand, in the end, the bottom line foundation, one of those things is that God is sovereign and that He is in control. And if we don't trust that He is sovereign, as we get kind of tossed around by the things that hit us in life, then we're going to live in fear at every turn. And that's no way to live. So if you look at verse 17, transitioning here as Israel is leaving the land, it says, "Then it came to pass, when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, also although that was near. For God said, lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. And the children of Israel went up in orderly ranks out of the land of Egypt." So we see here, God did not take them on the shortest or the easiest route. And if I had been planning the trip as an old truck driver logistically, I got all these people, women, children in tow, livestock. This is one of those times I'm not interested in meandering through the countryside. Let's get there, get a house built, and settle down. That's the way I would have planned a trip. And it's not that long of a trip from the Nile Delta to the land of Canaan. It's really, as things went back then, walking, that wouldn't have been that long of a trip. But God did not lead them the obvious way, the way that anyone else most likely would have taken. And we're told why that is, because it would be an issue for them. That if they had gone on that trading route that skirts the southeastern corner of the Mediterranean, they would have gone not only past multiple Egyptian squad posts, little guardian places as they guarded the trade routes, the soldiers did, but also they would have come into what now, if you're looking at the political spectrum, is the Gaza Strip, which was the land of the Philistines. And the Philistines, once they get up there, everybody's going to be taking pot shots at them. Maybe the Egyptians would have, left them alone, of course, if Pharaoh had told them to go. But at least by the time they get to the Philistine territory, Philistines, seeing all these people, all these cattle, all this livestock, women, and all that sort, they would have just ambushed them at every turn. And God knew they were not ready for that. They were in no position to fight, and they actually lacked the will to fight for other reasons. So we see them leaving Egypt here in an orderly manner. That's always funny to me because we always think they just marched out. That's not really what it means. They're just kind of here. It's not just screaming and hollering, but they're just heading out this general way. So at this point of the story, there's no panic. Everybody's saddle up, rolling. If you remember the old TV show, and let's head them out. And they begin heading east. Also, look at verse 19. It says, "And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had placed the children of Israel under a solemn oath, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here with you." We know from Genesis that Joseph had asked that his bones be taken with Israel when they left. This was done in faith because he knew at some point God was going to leave this tribe out back to the promised land. And so it's kind of just stuck in there. If you're reading it, it's kind of like almost a side note in the story. Oh yeah, and by the way, they grabbed Joseph's bones, which I believe since he was in Egypt, he would have been embalmed as they had practiced. And so they would be wheeling a coffin out. Archaeologically, they do believe they found Joseph's tomb in the land of Egypt in the Nile Delta. There's a statue over it that's Semitic in nature. So we do believe they would have carried the coffin out. Now, just to mention something here, because normally I would just go on through this, but it is in there for a reason. Think of this. They know Joseph. He is the son, one of the sons of Abraham. He has a big place. He was a big man, a famous name in their history and also in Egyptian history. So just think about, as they're making the journey, what it meant to them to have someone like Joseph's casket going with them on a trip. I think it would have, if they would help them to take into account his life story, which was a life of faith and obedience, even in a foreign prison. I think that would have ministered to them. So I'm sure that would have been, somebody kind of drops back in line and just walks around looking at it for a while and thinks about it, and then they catch back up with everybody else and goes. So you got a little of that going on also. Verse 20. "So they took for their journey from Sukkot and camped in Etham at the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so as to go by day and night. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day or the pillar of fire by night from before the people." So they leave Sukkot, which is on the east side of the Nile Delta, and they head to Etham, where they camp. This is on the outskirts of the Egyptian territory on their northeastern border. And they navigated according to GPS. Did y'all know that? God's positioning system. That's what I never had to use GPS till I moved to Atlanta. I prided myself in reading maps. You give me a map, I can find my way anywhere as long as I'm not trying to go down the road and read it. I can find my way around. And now here I'm lazy, just type it in and go, But they're using GPS too, God's positioning system. So they've got this fiery pillar at night, a pillar of a cloud. The Hebrew literally means a cylindrical shaped object. So I imagine kind of like in my mind, for what that's worth, and you know how that comes and goes. But in my mind, it's almost like a cloud. It looks like a tornado, but it's not shaped like one, but just kind of this. That's what I see. I don't know. I don't remember in the movie what it looked like. But the point is, by day they have this, and we read elsewhere that it shades them from the sun by day, and at night it's a fiery pillar, so they're able to see it, and it lights the way. So what it at least appears to be here is, at least at the very first part of the journey, they're able to travel 24/7, which I think they're doing. My opinion is that here, at least on the first part, they're walking 24/7 just to get as far away as they can. We see that, as we see later, the angel of the Lord is in this cloudy, fiery pillar. And the Hebrew there, this is the same Hebrew name for what we call the death angel back at the 10th plague, which, if you work it out throughout the rest of the Bible, actually is Jesus. All right? So the angel of the Lord, if you got certain Bibles, that'll be in all caps. Lord, it'll be capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. The A will be capitalized, and that is denoting what the Hebrew says here. So it's Jesus, the same angel that during the time of the 10th plague either protected the home where the blood was applied or brought death to the firstborn. Now we roll into the first verse of the next chapter. It says, "Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, that they turn and camp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal-zephon. You shall camp before it by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, They are bewildered by the land, the wilderness has closed them in. Then I will harden Pharaoh's heart, so that he will pursue them, and I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord." And they did so. So if you're not familiar with the toponyms or the place names here, these are, Migdol was actually an Egyptian military outpost, was close to there. If you were plotted it on a map, it looked something like this. They're meandering around. And of course, the scouts from Pharaoh's army tell them this, and this is what it looks like. They appear to be lost and confused. This is more than I say circuitous. It's just circular. They're kind of going around. And from the outside, looking in, it appears as though they are not being led by God. But there's a purpose for that. As Pharaoh got wind of it, he goes, And all this stuff has happened. Their God has wiped me out. And so they could go and worship. And now it appears as though they don't know where they're going. But we're told why God did this. He did it in order that he may spring a trap. And as Pharaoh is looking in, misinterpreting what God is actually telling, you understand, they're turning because God told them to turn. Later on in the journey through the wilderness, they're turning because God leads them one way or another. Kind of without getting technical, a kind of a stalling tactic, because he's not going to allow them to get there until either the iniquity of the peoples are full and until they're ready. So Pharaoh hears the news that the Israelites appear to be wandering around aimlessly, and I'm sure he thinks that God's unable to lead them and that they're now vulnerable. But, something to write down, this is just a ruse that God would use in order that God gets the glory. In the end, that is what's going to happen here. Look at verse 5. "Now it was told the king of Egypt that the people had fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people. And they said, Why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? So he made ready his chariot and took his people with him. Also he took 600 choice chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt with captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out with boldness. So the Egyptians pursued them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and overtook them camping beside the sea, beside Pi-hahiroth, before Baal-zephon." So what has happened, if you kind of put the story together, Pharaoh's getting the scattering reports, and they're saying, look, they are just kind of wandering around aimlessly all over the place. It's obvious they're not going. Why were they going this way? Why are they not going on the interstate? Why are they meandering through the little pig trails or what have you, or on these particular routes headed east? That makes no sense. And now Pharaoh's wheels start turning. Maybe they're not being led by their God. Maybe they are vulnerable now. And you see how that thought begins to work in here, and all of a sudden his pride, he starts roostering up. Wait a minute. If they are that stupid to wander around out there, now they're vulnerable, they're tired, now I've got them. And now his heart begins to harden, and he's wondering, why did I let them go in the first place? He's got a short memory. All he's got to do is step outside. All he's got to do is let his minions take a political poll of how things are going with the economy and everything in the shambles. That's all he's got to do, and then he can answer the question, yeah, I know, I remember now why we let them go. Get out. But all of a sudden, his pride won't let him see that. All of a sudden, all he sees is that in his mind they're vulnerable, and I've got to go out after them. So he takes out after them. He thinks they're wandering aimlessly, loads up the chariots, all his men, and get on it, and here we go. So all I can think of is the wagon trains, kind of, or Ben-Hur or something like that, rolling through the dirt, going everywhere. The Israelites are there camping, and all of a sudden, they can see the dust trails coming up. My son, when he was deployed, told me that's one of the things. You could see dust trails coming up over the sand dunes over there in the Middle East, and you knew somebody was coming. You didn't necessarily know who it was. You prayed to God it was the good guys. But you could see them coming over the hill, and you knew it's time to dig in, or if you don't hear something on the radio, and that's as to who it is. And all of a sudden, that's what they see now, the dust coming up, and everybody's like, what is all this? A lot. 600 chariots stir up a lot of dust. And all of a sudden now, their mind begins to work. The shaking comes in, the anxiety begins to hit, and all of a sudden, they're in trouble. Look at verse 10. And when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. So they were very afraid. And the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. And they cried out to the Lord, oh God, at first. And then, some of this is funny, all right? But just bear with me. They cry out to the Lord. Then they said to Moses, and this is, how many of y'all saw the original, Charlton Heston and Yul Brynner and Edward G. Robinson? This is where Edward G. Robinson comes to play. What are you going to do now, Moses? Let me see you God now. Billy Crystal does I remember him doing a good impersonation. He used that whiny kind of nasal thing. And if you're familiar with Edward G. Robinson, some of his other roles, you just hear him and all of that. But here he is, and this is what's coming up now. Now the enemy's bearing down on him. They say to Moses, they first cry to God, then they turn on Moses, because there were no graves, verse 11. Because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you so dealt with us to bring us up out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we told you in Egypt, saying, let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? Now up until this time, everybody's happy. And now, we told you we wanted to stay. That's where they are. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. And Moses turns, and I don't know, I'm glad I wasn't Moses. I'm not qualified to be Moses. Because I was fine. I tell y'all what, I can get out of here quicker than all y'all can. Y'all can deal with it. But Moses is a good leader. He says to the people, verse 13, do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. And I can see Charlton Heston right now. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. And here is the good leader standing up there, brave in faith, and telling the people, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. God's going to fight for you and all this. Now, hold on to that thought. But here we go. The army is eventually caught up with him. The people are fine as long as there's no sign of Egypt in their rearview mirror. And this is kind of how we are, I think, sometimes. But once the Egyptians caught up with them, now the fear and the complaints begin. This is, as I said, this is when Edward G. Robinson shows up. What are you going to do now, Moses? What are you going to do now? And the people now fault Moses with everything and blame what they see as their impending deaths on him. It's all your fault. And I'm thinking, you could have, you didn't have to get on the train. That is my first thought. Because I wouldn't want to hear it. But honestly, let's look at this. The verses we started with. This is why God didn't lead them in the way of the Philistines in the first place. Because he knew this was going to happen. God knew what he was doing. He knew they would fold like a cheap chair the first sign of hard times. God knows his people. And so how many of us, we need to ask ourselves this question. Here's a personal application question. How many of us would have played the role of Edward G. Robinson in this part of the play, this part of the movie, this part of the story? How many of us would have been that guy? How many of us are that guy? But what we're going to see here is that God knows his people. And actually, he didn't lead them through the land of the Philistines. It says, because he feared when they saw the war, they wouldn't be able to fight and they'd want to return to Egypt. The truth is, they're not going to have to fight. They're actually just going to have to do what Moses said, just see what the Lord is doing right here. But how many of us, when the stuff starts hitting the fan, become Edward G. Robinson? You should hear that in your head. Every time we get into that mindset, you should hear, now, Moses, and that's a cue. All right, I got to quit this. When I was coaching, I'd give guys a key word or something, and when they did something stupid on the field, I could just holler out that one word, and they get it. They understand. And that's what we need to do with Edward G. Robinson. You should look him up if you don't know who he is. Google him, and you'll see that face, the beard and the bandana and all that, and that should pop up in your mind every time we get into complaining mode. So, but Moses stands up as the consummate general, the leader of the man of faith, like you expect Charlton Heston to do. Stand still, the Lord's going to fight, and you'll never see him again. Then look at verse 15. And the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry to me? Now that's funny. I'll tell you why in a minute if you hadn't gotten it already. Tell the children of Israel to go forward, but lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. And I indeed will harden the heart of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them. So I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over his army, all his army, his chariots and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gained honor for myself over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. And once again, now this is funny. We just read this kind of in this monotone deal, but if you watch it in your mind's Viewmaster, if y'all remember those, in your mind's Viewmaster, you see, y'all stand still, hear this, believe in God, and He's going to rescue, He'll rescue us from the sea. And then he wanders around the corner behind a rock somewhere. What are we going to do? You got to pull something out of your pocket here, Lord. They're bearing down on us. There's nothing but water, no lifeboats. What are we going to do? And the Lord just, this is the point where the Lord's got, what are you looking at me for? What do you do at that point? I mean, there's funny stuff in the Bible. You got to have maybe a little bit of sense of humor to see it. But I can see Charlton Heston running around. What are you going to do? I gave him my best speech. Now, what's the plan? And God's like, what are you looking at me? But then he tells him, he says, move forward. That's what he actually says, move forward. Why are you crying to me? He says, just keep moving forward. And we get to those times when all of a sudden the enemy, the army, whatever, however you want to apply it, is bearing down on you. But you've been told to be here. I mean, God has directed them to this point. This fiery pillar of a cloud and all that is standing there, told him to camp. They know they're where they're supposed to be. So what's the problem? The problem is we got the enemy army bearing down on us. That's the problem. If I were standing up there, what's the problem? That's the problem. The enemy's coming, but there's God. There's the angel of the Lord. There's this fiery cloud deal. Then we know we were told specifically to go here. And so it should be all right. But God's response to Moses is just keep moving forward. Of course, you look at the sea and you go, what are we going to do? Walk across. I mean, how that doesn't pop into our minds. There's a barrier there. There's an enemy coming behind us. They've got us in a pincer movement at this point. And God says, just keep moving forward. If you are where you're supposed to be, you know that much. And now the question is, what do I do now? What do I do now? Then you just keep moving forward. There's a time that the Bible says when you've done all you can to stand, just stand. I mean, I've done all I can do. We see this in various personal situations. I've done all I can do. Lord, here it is. And you haven't told me to move. You haven't told me to do anything else. So I'm just going to stand here. But there are other times where you've been told to go that way, whatever that way is. You just have to keep moving forward. And now that's where they find themselves. Just keep moving forward. This is part of the plan. They don't understand that. God hasn't briefed it. He didn't even brief Moses on this. Just keep moving forward. But why? Because God tells Moses here, that Pharaoh will be neutralized and God will be exalted. This is the meta-narrative. This is the bigger, overarching story. The ultimate reason for all of this, that it takes a few verses to explain, and you should see the pattern now over and over as we get in this, is that God is going to be glorified. God, Yahweh, is going to be exalted as the most powerful, and the last part of it is by getting rid of the army of the most powerful nation on the earth at that time, then all their pagan pantheon of gods, He's going to sink all that, and everybody will know. That is the ultimate goal of your story, of my story, is that God is going to be glorified, that God is going to be exalted in our lives. That is the story. Even when Israel gets to the promised land, all the people that are already there and on the way, like, that's Israel. Their God wiped out Egypt. Their lives are a testimony of the power of God, which is what it's supposed to be for us also. And so now, when we find ourselves, and I've been there, I can get there on a very regular basis. What do I do now? Why am I know I'm here at this spot or that spot or what have you. What am I going to do now? Just keep moving forward. But I don't understand why. And God says, because I'm going to be glorified. You don't fully understand how you fit into that. But God says, you follow me and I will be glorified. God will be glorified. And that's what we're seeing here. All right? So this is all about the deliverance of His people when they get in this bind. Look at verse 19. And the angel of God, who went before the camp of Israel in the cloud, moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud went from before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. Thus it was a cloud and darkness to the one, and it gave light by night to the other, so that the one did not come near the other all that night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right and on their left, and the Egyptians pursued and went after them in the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. Now it came to pass in the morning watch that the Lord looked down upon the army of the Egyptians. And now let me say this right now. This is written, it gives you kind of an overview of what happened, and then you're backing up right here in verse 24, and you're coming at it from, I won't say a slightly different angle, but the narrative is now being added to. It's not written in a strict linear deal. Otherwise, you say, oh, they're already through. It's not working that way. Just kind of telling you an overview of what happens throughout the night, and then you're going to get more details kind of as it happened. And then you have to put the whole thing together. Now it came to pass in the morning watch, verse 24, that the Lord looked down upon the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and He troubled the army of the Egyptians, and He took off their chariot wheels so that they drove them with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. Whoever said that was smart. But understand, they just continue charging forward. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians on their chariots and on their horsemen. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and when the morning appeared, the sea returned to its full depth, while the Egyptians were fleeing into it. So the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. Then the waters returned and covered the chariots, the horsemen, and all the army of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. Not so much as one of them remained. But the children of Israel had walked on dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. So now we have the denouement. This is the climax of it all. The cloud moves. Here's the army bearing down on them as they're camped kind of on the beach or what have you. And this fiery cloud, the angel of the Lord in it, goes and moves back around to their rear flank, and then is a barrier to Pharaoh. He has to stop. And on that side, I'm saying on the western side of it, as he looks back at the Egyptian army, it's just pitch black darkness. That's what God has done. He's shadowed them. They're in darkness. They have to stop. They can't get through this thing. They can't see. They're brought to a stop. While on the other side, the light is shining. And of course, Israel can see. And then this east wind comes through, and it blows, and it parts the waters. It says they're like a wall on left and right. Elsewhere in the Bible, the English term that's used there is congealed. And then by the wind blowing over the ground for all night long, or most of the night at least, it dries out the sand or the mud that's on the bottom. If you've ever tried to walk through a lake or a riverbed when the water is low or gone, you know you don't just walk across like you do this. It's what we used to call suck mud. You can get a truck stuck in it and lock a whole transmission up, the wheels up. That's how tough it is. He's not going to have them do that because you're going to lose your flip-flops all the way across. It's not going to work. And remember, they have to wear these same flip-flops all the way for 40 years, that we're told later. So he dries it out, and they're able to go quickly across and get on the other side. And then at some point, God, the pillar moves and says, all right, have at it, Pharaoh. And he's like, all right, here we go. And they go in right after him. Charge! And they go down into it. And at some point, as they get across, when everybody's in the middle of it, God says, all right, hold up your hand, Moses. And the waters come back together, and the waves crash. And, you know, you got dead Egyptians everywhere, chariots floating, or if they can float. I don't know, never had one. But Moses lifts his hand, the waters come crashing together. We see God moving in the cloud as a buffer, allowing them time to get across, allowing the dry land, the riverbed or what have you, the seabed, to dry out. And at the same time now, this is what I want you to think about. At the same time God is moving and doing all this through this cloud and holding them up and making all this stuff happen, you got Moses holding out his hand. Sometimes it says holding out his rod over the sea, the big sticky head. And what you see here is God working. All Moses is doing is holding his hand out. There's no laser beam coming from his hand, blasting anything out. All he's doing is this. He's just doing what he's told to do. Kind of trips me out when you see all these guys now, they're looking for the Ark of the Covenant. And you see the skeptics and all these guys, these scientific guys, and they're like, everybody wanted the Ark of the Covenant because it would just flatten armies. It was like some kind of powerful generator. I'm thinking, really? First of all, if you're not supposed to touch it, you don't need to touch it because you're going to die. We know that much. But the point is, they see the power, but they don't know the source of it. They think there's some kind of alien constructed generator battery that you could push a button and just, that's reportedly why Hitler wanted it. At least in Raiders of the Lost Ark. When all of a sudden, light comes out of it. God is the power source. And He can turn that thing on or not. But the point is, it led Israel in battle because it represented the presence of God. Moses is here representing God. There's no power in his hand, all right? He doesn't have a magic wand or anything. God is the one moving miraculously and doing all this. Moses is just being obedient. But what I want us to see is that God is moving in all of it, but He wants to work through us. Through our prayers, through our listening to others, through our ministry, through the time we spend just taking time out to invest in someone else's life. God wants to work through us, but He's the one He's the one with all the power. He is the one that is to be exalted. Look at verse 30. So the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt. So the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and His servant Moses. So all this happens. Everybody's standing there. Waves are crashing. Eventually everything calms down. You just got Egyptians, horses, and everything else. Some of them floating around, and some of them wash up on the beach from back home. That's an important visual lesson to the people of Israel, because now they know that enemy that had been dogging them, hounding them, is now truly in their past. It's gone. Egypt won't bother you anymore. That's what they get to learn here in the natural. Egypt won't bother you anymore. That's been done away with. But in the whole of the story, as I said, the meta-narrative, God doesn't always lead us the way that we or the world think we should go. It's nonsensical. It makes no sense to anybody. What are they doing? You quit a 6-figure job to go into ministry? Which I didn't quit a 6-figure job to go into ministry. I never had a 6-figure job. I know some people that do, but it's never been me. I've been thinking, I don't know how many years it take me to save up to get to 6 figures. But the point is, sometimes we do things when God directs us in our lives that they don't make any sense. But God knew His people, and He knows us now. Their failure, talking about Israel here, in a crucial faith moment, when they start blaming Moses and what are we doing and what are you going to do now? Edward G. Robinson syndrome comes up. That didn't take God by surprise. He led them that particular way because He knew it was going to happen anyway, but it's better to happen now where everything is kind of contained. All this was done. Everything that happened there was for their benefit. And God moves slowly in our lives, most of the time, for our own good. And some of us go crazy and get anxious because we feel like we got to hurry up to keep up with God. I don't think we have to get in a hurry to keep up. I think we just merely have to move in obedience. Because throughout the Bible, in the bigger scheme of things, I don't see God moving quickly. It's been 2,000 years since He resurrected. And the day is, 1,000 years is a day and a day is 1,000 years. That washes out if you read the whole verse. I understand He sees time differently than we do. But from our perspective, we don't see God just moving at a miraculous pace where we make ourselves manic trying to keep up. The bigger picture is that He's moving slowly because He's working with us and through us. And He wants to do it that way. Furthermore, we see that in this instance, Israel didn't have to fight. Now, eventually they will have to do some fighting, but God's going to be there in front of them. In this instance, because they're not ready to fight, they didn't have to fight. God fought and beat the Egyptian army all by Himself. Why? If He wanted them to have to fight, they could have taken another route. But He knows right now they're not ready. God knows His people. You could say, well, why didn't He just take them up the interstate and He could have whipped the little Egyptian outpost and the Philistines and they could have been there a lot quicker. Once again, they're not ready. The old scholar said, it didn't take long to get Israel out of Egypt, but it took 40 years to get Egypt out of Israel. They're not ready at this point to possess the land and do what it is that He requires of them in His grand scheme. The route is important. Not just the destination. The route is important. And when we see, I got the fire insurance, I can go into heaven, that's the destination in a sense. Technically, there'll be a new heavens and new earth will be down here, not just floating around on clouds. But what I mean by that is it's not just the fact that I got the fire insurance or salvation, it's just the destination. It's the route between here and there now that we have to obediently follow God on. Why? For our preparation as well as the ministry of those to whom we minister in this life. That's what's going on here. And then when we don't understand what's going on, you have to understand that in this instance, at least, God sprang a trap for Pharaoh. They didn't understand. The Israelites don't understand it. Did you lead us out here to get killed? And God's like, no, just chill out. And a lot of people don't like watching movies or TV shows with me or ball games. For one, nobody's allowed to talk. You can't talk if you're in my house watching my movie, my TV show, or my ball game. Think. How come they did this? Why don't you do this? That's not right. Shh. Shut. Why? I'm not sure. But I bet if we keep watching, we'll figure it out. Why did? No. Shh. Because you understand, if you pay attention to movies, there's always something sitting there in the background. There's somebody that says one little thing. That's there for a clue. Figure it out. Think. Work through it. You're already vegetating. Try to use your brain a little bit when watching the show. Because it's there for a reason. we don't always understand what God is doing. So you see somebody, I'm married to a beautiful woman who thinks that at the end of it has to be perfect. Everything is supposed to be on Hallmark, where something bad happens, but everybody is in love with it's great. It's like a Brady Bunch TV show. Everything is always groovy in the end. Well, life's not that way. And most dramas are not that way. And so when you see the army bear now, what has God done? Blah, blah, blah. Shh, chill out. I know He's in control. I don't know what's going to happen. But I bet if we watch and trust in God, it's going to be all right at the end of the movie. And after all, we're all living a big movie. Don't be talking, look, think, deal. Don't trip out. God sprang that trap on Pharaoh. There's always a reason why God leads us on any route. They were specifically told. They knew that. There's always a reason for it, even if it's a very circuitous run or one that's looping around and going this way and all that. To the world, it may look as though we and or God don't know what we're doing, but rest assured, this is what you have to have. Sometimes this is all you've got to hang on to, is that He is leading us in the way that is best for us. Israel's entire journey took longer than it needed and went in what the world would have considered the wrong direction, but there was a purpose for it, for all of it. Israel could not enter the promised land until they were ready for it. So when we are being led in what we see as circles, it simply means that we may not yet be ready to get to where we think we ought to be. Don't get ahead of God. That's just as dangerous as lagging behind. The key is to move in obedience. And what I like about it is that's usually not fast. I get accused. I am bad about. I've learned a long time ago. When I make knee-jerk, snap decisions, I go to jail. It's just not good. It's not good. So, having learned this, I have to understand that maybe I ought to chew on it a while. And so I do get accused of moving very slowly. And the more major the decision, the more slowly I move. I understand that. But God's not in that big a hurry a lot of times. So I have to move slowly because I want to be in obedience. And I can jump, fly off the handle, and do a lot of things wrong. I don't want to get ahead of God, nor do I want to lag behind. But when we're faced with a decision like that, I believe He gives us some time to think it over and pray about it. Throughout all that we've read today, we've got to understand that though it didn't make sense from a human standpoint, the logistics are just not the way it should have gone if you're just trying to get from point A to point B. We have to understand that God was working according to His plan and for Israel's best interest. In fact, write this down. God's plan and what is best for us are synonymous. Let me say that again. I should have put it on the wall. God's plan and what is best for us are synonymous. We need to realize that. Our best interest is what He has in mind, even when we don't understand it, even when it makes no common sense. So no matter how nonsensical or circuitous the route might be, God's plan is what's best for us. So I want to encourage you, if you're walking in circles, or at least you feel as though you are, and it could be that you're not, you just maybe aren't moving at the rate you had planned. We plan our little lives out. And there's a lot of times I see things in the lives of church people, and I have to keep my mouth shut. It's not always easy for me. You might find that hard to believe. I have to keep my mouth shut because sometimes I can be like Pharaoh looking in from the outside. I don't know all that's going on. So until somebody comes to me asking and I can hear their side of the story and maybe, or at least give some prayerful advice, I don't exactly know what's going on. I certainly don't have all the answers. There's some of y'all that I call and ask for help. I'm not any smarter than anybody else. I'm not any closer to God than anybody. There's probably a bunch of people in here closer than I am. But the point I'm trying to make is we don't always know. It doesn't make sense. And there might be some in here today that feel like they're kind of running in circles or marking time just sitting there, not moving too slowly, have gotten ahead of God, whatever the case may be. You need to know that God's plan is what's best for you. And if He's told you to go to a specific spot or do a specific thing, unless He said stop, then you move forward. Whatever the enemy is doing, bearing down on you. Because what God has in mind for us is always what's best for us. Would y'all bow your heads, please? Dear Heavenly Father, in the complicated world in which we now live, with all the things that are going on, all the things that are available to steal our time, all the circumstances that come against us, the first world problems we have, being too busy and all that goes on with that, we can quickly find ourselves going days or maybe weeks or months at a time, Lord, without really consulting you on what we're supposed to be doing. I pray that that would stop today for each of us as we move, trying to experience your will to the top of the priority list. But Father, I do pray that we would seek your face and that you tell us when we've done all we can to stand, just stand. When you've put us in a particular position or particular situation, we just move forward unless you say to stop. Lord, we can hear that. We don't know all the details, but we get the rough idea. And Lord, that you're moving slowly enough that you're not going to leave us behind. It'll be us that lag behind or us that get ahead, but you're not going to leave us behind. You know us. You know the journey which is in front of us, Father, and you're not going to move without us. You move slowly because of our benefit. And Lord, I just pray that we would thank you for that, understand that, and that it would bring us peace. That it would bring us peace. So, Father, I pray that we would all go in peace today, knowing these things. Lord, put it in our hearts as we go throughout a busy week in a very busy, big city with our busy lives. Lord, give us that peace, Father. And we thank you for that, because it only comes through Jesus. It's in His name I pray.